All right, there we go. Hey everyone, thanks for being here today and giving us this opportunity to talk about ISO 27701, integrating privacy in the information security management systems. I'm joined today by Yoko Washington Ruiz, who is the Senior Director on the Privacy team at Match Group. We do have an action-packed agenda today, and we plan to walk you through the 27701 journey. We plan to provide you with what is the standard, why the certificate is important, and how it can add value to your organization. Moving from ISMS to ISPMS, which is a combination of ISMS plus PIMS, which we will be talking about more in detail. Then we would be going over the structure and the clauses of the standard, what needs to be checked before getting on this journey. And lastly, we will also be going over some of the questions that you might have. Okay, starting off with what is ISO 27701. This standard is basically an extension of privacy extension of the ISO 27001 standard, which is a security best practices standard. So if you want to get ISO 27701 certified, you would also need to get ISO 27001 certified first, or you can also actually go for both the certificates at the same time. So in essence, we would be dealing with privacy controls in addition to the ISO 27001 controls, which focuses on the security sides of the things. Like ISO 27001 standard has ISMS, which refers to Information Security Management System. It mainly provides details around this design and control effectiveness related to the security posture of the organization. Similarly, for ISO 27701, we have PIMS, which stands for Privacy Information Management System, which helps in establishing guidelines and controls for effectively managing the control and processing of personal information. From the standard itself, clause 3.2 also calls out the same thing, the definition of PIMS, and it is also mentioned on the slide over here. I will pass it to Yoko for going over why ISO 27701.
Hi, everyone. So ISO, with international right there in the title, it is a globally recognized standard, and it allows us to demonstrate to the public, to regulators, and to any other third parties that we have achieved and we do maintain a high level of privacy, security and privacy practices. I would say that from a practical perspective, this is something that we are able to kind of make use of. For example, we had a campaign with some marketing partners in Japan, and they required us to submit a pretty extensive report demonstrating our technical and organizational measures and showing that we did have a high level of compliance. We were able to simply demonstrate or prove that we met these requirements by giving them our ISO certificate, which saved everybody a lot of time and also gave the partners a high level of comfort also. I would say that also in the dating space, it is a competitive point of difference. Tinder is the first dating app in the world to have obtained the ISO 27701 certificate. Dating apps by their nature are very sensitive. People put all kinds of things on dating apps, the use of them. They want to, meet people. It's a very personal use. I would say that most people even consider the fact of a dating app profile to be something that they would want to keep private. We certainly treat it as personal information. While most users aren't aware of what ISO means, and it would be impossible for me to quantify the effect of achieving ISO 27701 on other business KPIs, I can say that, just generally as a privacy practitioner, maybe some of you have the same experience. I find that there seems to be a heightened level of awareness by consumers about what privacy rights are, the right to be deleted, the right to have a copy of their data. And people they also become concerned and reach out to us whenever other apps in our dating space have any, they end up in the news for the wrong reasons. So being able to point people to the ISO certificate and have that as part of our story has been definitely something that we've been able to leverage. At Match Group, Tinder is part of the Match Group family of dating apps and other social discovery services. We've had a privacy framework for some time, and we've only just achieved ISO 27701 certification last year. But this does give us, in a really rapidly evolving area of technology, in a very highly competitive space, it feels like our engineering teams are always at the tip of the spear trying to do the next best thing. This allows us to make sure that we're constantly checking, we have the ability to constantly check our own framework against a globally recognized standard like 27701. With respect to alignment with privacy regulations, any other privacy compliance team members in the House will know that a few years ago, GDPR was a boogeyman that we could always invoke to get people to comply, right? Everybody was worried about that big 4% sanction. And as the years went on and the 4% sanction, it never came for us. I would say that maybe it kind of lost some of its like scariness. So while, obviously GDPR is not the only privacy law, with CCPA, that was another talking point. I will say that having ISO 27701 as a business objective for Tinder, it does give us as privacy practitioners something else to point to say, not only do we need it for compliance with these laws, they may or may not come for us, right? They may or may not audit us. We do have this annual audit process. We do have to recertify every 3 years. If you want to maintain that ISO status, to keep doing, all the things that you do with the ISO certification. So please, be sure, we got to make sure that we're on point with all of these requirements on an ongoing basis. And that is, exactly what the continuous improvement benefit of achieving ISO means. It means that we have to review policies and procedures and controls on a regular basis. At our last annual compliance meeting for ISO, we had our chief legal officer, our chief privacy officer, Tinder's head of strategy, Tinder's CTO, Match Group's head of security. We had the undivided attention of all of these company heavy hitters, so we could tell them, where we were, what concerns, if we had any, that we might have. So this continuous improvement aspect of this process has really been a benefit from my perspective. And then lastly, the teams, they like to move fast. Sometimes discipline around proper vendor vetting and due diligence is something that if you let them, teams will want to kind of like gloss over or move right past in a very quick manner. In addition to our privacy framework and our security practices, ISO itself dictates pretty robust third-party risk management processes. So again, this gives us another opportunity to point to a standard that we all want to maintain to kind of keep everybody doing the right thing with respect to onboarding vendors.
Awesome. Thanks, Yoko. All right, the next slide talks about moving from ISMS to ISPMS. ISPMS is just a fancy term when we are combining ISMS and PIMS. So when we think about moving from ISMS to ISPMS, you would be thinking about all the security controls and trying to map them to security and privacy controls, since the standard itself is an extension of the security standard 27001. So when we are thinking about, for example, key performance indicators related to security, now we would start thinking about key performance indicators related to security as well as privacy. A simple example could include something like if you are measuring the percentage of employees who have gone through the annual security awareness training, now you would be thinking about the percentage of employees who are going through the annual security and privacy awareness training. So this can also be combined into one KPI, or it can be separated out as well, depending on the preference of the organization. Another big one that I want to call out is risk management. The security risk that you might be tracking in the past would now also include privacy risk. So these can be two separate risk registers as well. One thing that was important to note over here is for the privacy risk, you would also want to include the potential impact that it is going to have on the users or the members whose personal information you are dealing or processing with. So this can simply be added as a separate column to the risk register that is existing or you are trying to create. Moving on to the structure and clauses of the standard. The standard itself is divided into 8 parts, going from clauses 1 through 8. The first 4 clauses basically set the basis of the standard, going from scope, basically talking about the scoping section of the standard, the types and the sizes of the organization that can go through the standard requirement, mentioning that the standard can be used by private as well as public companies, any government entities or non-profit organizations as well, which identify themselves as PII controllers and PII processors. The normative references talks about the different standards that ISO 27001 is referring or using. The next one is about terms and definitions that obviously would be used in the standard, just clarifying on those. Then general talks through how the standard is basically structured and also contains a link to the different clauses of the standard. Moving on to the main clauses, starting from clause 5, calls about the PIMS specific requirements and other information regarding and how it maps to the clauses 4 through 10 of the ISMS, talking through the design of the PIMS. For example, when you are establishing the context of the organization, that you might also be doing the same exercise when you're dealing with 27001. Now you would be including privacy in the scope as well. Again, the same example of like including key metrics. So if you were thinking about just security in the past, you would now be thinking about security as well as privacy metrics. Clause 6 basically goes over the PIMS specific requirements and other information as it maps to the ISO Annex A controls that were included in the 27001 standard, and the guidance can be obtained from ISO 27002 standard. That's about 5 and 6. Now moving on to 7 and 8. Clause 7, we would be looking at the PIMS specific guidelines on the design of the systems, like similar to what we had in ISO 27001. And in clause 8, we would be looking at the privacy specific controls that would be audited as per the ISO 27002 guidelines. In terms of the controls, those are mentioned in Annex A and Annex B. Annex A control includes 31 for PII controllers, and Annex B contains 18 controls for PII processors. These controls are also divided into 4 sections, going from conditions of collection and processing, what are the obligations to your PII principles, how you are maintaining privacy by design and default, and lastly, they also go over PII sharing, transfer, and disclosure. And I will pass it to Yoko for going over the ISO 27701 roadmap.
So I know that we're all privacy and security professionals in the room, so forgive me if I tell you something that you already know. But of course, the best place to start is by understanding what your current posture is, right? If you maybe your privacy program is still maturing, maybe probably a good place to start is by drafting your statement of applicability, which is actually several steps that will involve you casting a pretty wide net to talk to members of your technical, security, privacy, legal teams in order to assess like what the current posture is. Specific to privacy, I'll talk about privacy because that's what I do. You have to make sure that all the privacy policies, user-facing disclosures and notices are, you have all of those together. You have to know all of the privacy requirements, or I'm sorry, privacy regulations that your organization is subject to, and do have a handle on all of your privacy procedures and practices and user-facing controls, because these are also going to be an important component as far as what's evaluated. I would say that if you don't yet have like robust processes around DPIA, or your records of processing activity aren't all done, you haven't fully figured out solutions for user data lifecycle management, or data subject access requests, and definitely get those pieces in place first, because it will come up in the audits that will come later. So just your basic GDPR 101, get that stuff in order, and do start drafting your statement of applicability. Your statement of applicability is actually going to be the document that's referred to in the audits that will come also. And then understand and align with the ISO 27701 requirements. If you're new to privacy program compliance, it's extremely organized and very specific. So it's kind of gives you like a run list for what it is that you need to do. Do perform a gap analysis of those requirements against the posture, your current state of things, and see what needs to be remediated. I would point out, like I mentioned before, we had a pretty mature privacy program, and the process of compiling all of the required documents, ensuring that all of the various stakeholders had their inputs in, conducting the gap analysis, and organizing the remediation of findings was a significant project. It took months. So I would say that make sure that you have the appropriate resourcing at hand also. We were very fortunate to have Palak run this process for Tinder, as she'll run it for other companies at Match Group. And, as efficient and smooth as she made it, it still took quite a long time. So please be prepared for that. And then the audits. So first comes the internal audit. You can think of this as a mock audit. It is still, although it's mock, it's still required by ISO as part of the process. Excuse me. So do conduct the internal audit. It gives you a kind of a free pass to find things that you're going to need to polish up before the final review. So allow enough time between the internal audit and the remediation, especially depending on how your gap analysis went, so that you don't get pressed for time or you don't miss the external audit time frame. And then you would conduct the external audit. For us, we had the project team, we had security stakeholders, we had the members of the privacy team, including myself, participate on this call with the auditors so we could answer questions about the privacy program directly.
Awesome. Thanks, Yoko. So now that Yoko has helped us in understanding what needs to be done before getting on this ISO journey, I would also want to provide a high-level overview around the audit process and what it takes to get ISO 27701 certified. As part of the external audit that Yoko was talking about, we do have stages 1 and stage 2. Stage 1 talks about the documentation, what are the main clauses, talking through the design and management of the system. It consists of a policy review process to determine the readiness of your framework to undergo the full audit in stage 2. This review also includes inspection of all client documents required for the standard. Then moving on to stage 2, it deals with the control effectiveness of the framework. So the second stage of the initial audit would include in-depth testing of the controls to determine the framework has been implemented appropriately as per the policies, and whatever you have mentioned in the policies has actually been done or worked on, basically gathering evidence around the controls. This stage is also being performed at the client location, or if you have included multiple locations in the scope, we would be covering that as well. At the end of this stage, the auditors would determine if they would want to go ahead and issue the ISO 27701 certificate or not. One of the things, if there are any gaps that have been identified as part of the external audit, you might want to fix them before they issue you the certificate. So that covers the initial audit, what you are going to go through the first time you plan to get ISO certified. Then moving on, we have surveillance audits. ISO 27701 certificate is valid for a 3-year term, during which obviously you are going to go through the surveillance audits, and which are also required at least to go through at a minimum of annual basis. During these surveillance audits, the auditor would be conducting the brief on-site review to determine if there have been any changes made to your ISPMS framework, and just perform testing to continue, or at least to make sure that you are following the same framework that you went through in your original audit and the controls are still being implemented. Then we have the recertification audit. As I mentioned, that the certificate is valid for 3 years. So before the expiry of the initial 3 years of certification term, in subsequent cycles, you would be going through full recertification audits to ensure the continuity of your certification. The scope of this audit would depend on the findings of the surveillance audits and the information determined from the stage 1 of the recertification audit. And just a reminder again that this certificate is valid for 3 years, so you would have to go through the recertification audit every 3 years. All right, this sums up the certification process as well. And now we would be opening up for any questions that you might have. Actually, I do see a question already. Yoko, if you want to take a first stab at it, it says, how do you balance implementing privacy controls without restricting user experience?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I was just drafting a response, like, geez, I don't. I work in privacy operations, so we build apps, as you might know, and we have product teams that want to make sure that the user journey is as frictionless and enjoyable and smooth as possible. And they find legalese and consent banners and the like to be pretty disruptive to that. We do take a risk-balanced approach. What Privacy Council does is they negotiate with teams. It just takes a lot of back and forth. I would say that, maybe in some cases, not everybody is fully happy, but as long as the legal requirement is being met and the teams feel comfortable that we've been able to do things in a minimally obstructive way, that's the objective that we reach for. We do have privacy settings, extensive privacy settings within like the settings part of the Tinder application, if anyone has seen one of the Match Group apps. So to the extent that we can manage privacy controls from the settings, we do that. Not to speak out of turn, but just that's how I've observed my colleagues negotiating things with the product teams.
Thanks, Yoko. Any other questions that you all have? Feel free to drop them in the chat.
Or also do feel free to reach out to us in LinkedIn. Maybe there's not enough time to kind of get to the chat and type things. You can find us both on LinkedIn, or I'm at yoko.washington@match.com if you want to connect over email. I sit in LA. If anyone is in LA and wants to catch up for a privacy chat over coffee, please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. Okay, another question is there an advantage to pursuing ISO 27701 alongside ISO 27001 versus going for ISO 27001 first and building ISO 27701 on the top of that? I can take that question. So at Tinder, what we did was build ISO 27001 first, and on the top of that, we got ISO 27701. My personal experience says that if you do not have a lot of, if you are not a mature company, if you are trying to get on that, I would say going it one by one. So ISO 27001 basically sets the entire structure and builds that platform on which you can build on more certificates. So if you are already aware that you have a predefined great process which is going on and you have everything that you feel is mature enough, I would say you can go for both of the certificates at the same time. But if you're trying to build that gradually, I would say go for one certificate first and build on the top of that.
I definitely agree. I would just pile on and say that this is it's in some ways like a box checking exercise. They want to see certain things. So if you don't already have a climate of security, like a mentality and systems for security, definitely I would tackle them one at a time. And as I mentioned before, it is time consuming even for a privacy mature organization. So it may make sense to do them one at a time.
Yep.
I can't see an advantage of doing them at the same time.
Right. Any other questions that you have? Right. If not, then thank you so much, everyone, for attending this session. It was great exposure for us as well. And thank you for those questions. If you have more questions, as Yoko mentioned, feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Right?
Thanks so
everyone.
much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.